health. There need to be more awareness raising about what these legislative proposals are all about, what we should be demanding, because one thing is to have rights on the legislative level, but another thing is to have access to rights, which is something we mentioned earlier. So I would say that on a legislative level, we're not doing too badly. We have a pretty good anti-trafficking law, because trafficking of women has, over the last decades, been a huge problem in Cyprus. In terms of violence against women, we had one of the best domestic violence law at the time that was introduced in 1995. But then we have issues with implementation. We ratified the Istanbul Convention in 2017, which is the Council of Europe Convention combating and preventing and combating violence against women. We have labor rights, so we have laws on equality in the labor market, we have laws for maternity, we have laws for leave. They could be better. I mean, these are always laws that can be improved and amended and so on to reflect new challenges and so on. But by and large, on legislative level, we're doing okay. The issues that we can talk about later on is how are these implemented? What mechanisms are in place, and that's when we talk about policy and strategy and gender mainstreaming and institutional mechanisms to ensure that we have access to those rights and that those laws are implemented on a practical level. And then, of course, there are groups of the population that have absolutely no access to those rights, be it migrant women, domestic workers, refugees and asylum seekers, and so on. So there are pockets of vulnerabilities that even with what we do have, that many Cypriot women, and we do benefit to an extent from the laws and the policies that exist. There are those that don't at all, so that is a huge challenge.
So, thank you, Susana. And I think next week we could probably ask Dr. Hajipavlou then, since legislation, policy are very close to leadership as well, and who is at the top making these decisions and who is overseeing implementation. Would you be able to share a little bit about representation at the decision-making table of women?
Okay, good evening from me. Thank you so much for the invitation. And it's really a beautiful evening, and looking forward to having a conversation, all of us together, to share experiences, but also new ideas. Now, with regard to what Susana said, and I absolutely agree with her, we have in place very good laws. And why did we have these? Because we had to harmonize. Otherwise, we couldn't enter the European Union. And when they started the discussion in the House of Parliament, I was invited to sort of observe some of their discussions, there was nothing mentioning how we are going to implement this. And also, how we are going to let the women at the grassroots, in the rural areas, know about these laws. Therefore, making them own these rights. Therefore, and when I asked, how can you leave this out, they said, we don't have time now. And we don't have time now, it never really came. So, if you go to rural areas, if you go to areas that are not in the center of the island, and you ask them about their rights of domestic violence or their rights within the family law and so on, they don't know. That's why very late and very slowly we had women coming up and reporting these incidents. So one aspect that we really miss is this aspect of becoming aware, of becoming informed, and of really owning this information in our daily life. Instead, we go to lawyers, and of course lawyers appropriate all of our needs in a way there, and we don't have a voice there either. They represent us, they mediate through us. So how can we develop this voice, number one? Now, with regard to the representation, I believe very much that both representation and participation in public life is not only a human right, but also it's an aspect of democracy that if it's not fully implemented, it means that our democracy is not really functioning. And in Cyprus, I must say, our democracy is not functioning with regard to these two particular rights. You cannot have a House of Representatives in the Republic of Cyprus, not to mention, the Turkish Cypriot women's representation and so on, and only 18% of the population. Where are the other 82? And what kind of agendas do they build there? And everything that has to do with our daily life is discussed in the House of Representatives. And when the representation and the voices of women, and when I say voices of women, I always make this distinction. Women who are really gender sensitive, who are really gender aware, who are women who know how to promote women's rights. And women's rights, as Daria mentioned, they're also human rights. But we talk about human rights as if they're only men's rights. So we need, as women, to bring out this. Can you believe 21st century still? So representation in the parliament is more. In the executive, okay, we have now we have 3 ministers, right? And but when, out of 11, but when did these 2 come in? After men withdrew to other positions. They were not there initially. So do we fill in places when men decide to move somewhere else, higher or in more status places and so on? So this is another aspect that we really need to. And with regard to the negotiations, since you mentioned that, to this day, we've had peace negotiations going on for decades and decades. And no woman ever sat at the negotiating table in an equal status with men. So men are really discussing the future of our island without the women being present, without the women's voice on issues of security, on issues of property, on issues of economy, on issues of citizenship. Citizenship has been always defined in terms of ethnic origin. I'm not neither Greek nor Turkish. So why am I going to belong in a future federal republic? So this needs to really be unpacked and so on. So this for now, is it okay? Different maps of the world that are near the Middle East. So we're Middle East. There are maps that show Cyprus more towards Africa or Asia. In the United Nations, we are in the Asian list. Okay? If you look at European countries, we are not included there as European. It's in the Asian list. And geopolitics always play a very big role, and especially in this region of the world, as you know, with Lebanon and with Israel and Palestine and all the countries, Jordan, Syria now, us, etc. So the bigger question is, where do I belong? Where do I belong? And this is shifting according to politics, according to interests, and according also to superpower politics.
I guess I would add, I think just exactly. I think it depends, right? I mean, I think it depends who you're talking to and what point they're trying to make. You know, the same person will tell you, well, Cyprus is part of Europe. Of course we're part of Europe. Oh, and then you say, well, but we don't kind of meet all of the EU requirements on some of these things. Well, you know, we're not really in Europe. We're really in the Mediterranean. You know, it depends. I mean, I feel like it depends where you want to peg yourself. And it becomes a convenient, Maria was right. I mean, I think this is the ultimate question. It becomes a convenient halfway house. You know, when we want to, I think when we, and I include myself in this, when we want to sort of put Cyprus in a positive light, you sort of look south and say, well, wow, this is better than, you know, some of our neighbors. And then when you look towards Europe, you're like, yeah, I wish we could be like them, but we're really... But then sometimes we're European. And of course we should be there, but we don't always want the responsibilities. We see it, I think, again, governments are okay. This is a governmental thing. They do what's convenient. It's the same, I mean, again, not to take it back to migrants and asylum seekers, but it's convenient. I mean, you can't be both. You can't be the only recognized government on the island of Cyprus and then say, well, yeah, but I don't really want to accept all these people who want international protection. You know, you don't get to do both. You either are or you aren't. Anyway, we digress.
On that point, because you were talking also about in terms of geography, and in terms of what kind of alliances we make, was that part of the question as well? Well, I mean, in terms of the work that we do at Mix, I mean, when we originally were founded, I think the idea was that it would have a regional focus, and then life happens, you know, politics happens, EU happens, and then so we very much work without ignoring our regional location and the alliances that we have in the region, but because of funding and because we have the EU legislative framework in Cyprus, we more often, I would say, create alliances, and we do this, you know, systematically with our sisters in other EU member states. And that would be through, you know, networking. To remember, so for example, if it's violence against women, we'll be working with women across Europe, you know, to advocate. For just one really quick example, during COVID, you know, we did a lot of advocacy work asking for an increase in EU funding for women's specialist services because domestic violence was a huge issue, but integrating gender equality in recovery plans, in you know, so things like that, which will trickle down to Cyprus as well. Or if we're advocating for an increase for funding for fundamental rights and justice programs, which fund our work, I don't know, fund women's organizations work across Europe, you know, we will do that advocacy at the European level together with organizations across Europe. And then we also work at the regional level, but less so, mainly because of one, our EU status, and two, where's the money coming from? Because we don't get funded to work on the regional level. We get funded to work on the European. You know, so unfortunately sometimes our choices are constrained because of that. And your second question, you hit a sore point as well there, because what we often hear in Parliament, and Maria mentioned it before, let's just get this out of the way and we'll change it later. You know, but it's problematic. But there are issues. But this is not going to work. And he goes, don't. Let it pass. It's better than nothing. It's better than where we were yesterday. And then we'll change it. This gets on honestly, it gets on my nerves, you know, because we work really hard to get it right the first time. And I don't see any reason why we shouldn't get it right the first time, right? But they can change. They can. And when I mentioned about them changing, it's it's usually because once you're implementing a law like the anti-trafficking law, for example, or the domestic violence law, you're going to find loopholes, or you're going to find that doesn't work in practice. I think that something really needs to be worked on and implemented, so for you to find where I've got 1,000 amendments now that we want to put forward for the domestic violence law, because there are new challenges, there are new things that we want to do, we want to move forward. So I think that it's not always because they were not right the first time. It's because they need to reflect new realities, new forms of violence, new technology, social, a lot of things. But to answer your question about Lebanon, I was aware of this. It depends because it's political there as well. That was a strategy to silence the women's movement. Here it's because we can't be bothered. It's not, they're not that smart. It's not so much, let's do this so that they can be quiet and they'll leave us alone. It's because we're going to get a fine from the European Union if we don't pass it yesterday. It's because they're worried that the men in Parliament won't let it pass, and they won't get a political consensus. They don't think far enough to think to silence us. And we're not that strong. But in Lebanon, they are. And so that is quite dangerous. So I wouldn't be worried about it.
We've had another question as well.
My question is quite controversial. What role do you think the church plays in women's rights? And do you see the church as being something that has a role in non-conservative society?
I don't know if you followed recently the case of the teacher and the artist and his works of art and so on, and what the Archbishop said and so on. But anyway, the church as an institution, in Cyprus, and Cypriot life, but more specifically women's lives, has played and is playing a very important role still. It fills us with a lot of guilt, it fills us with a lot of shame, and it fills us, I think, with a lot of doubts about ourselves and our rights. Okay? So the church, I was married in the United States, civil wedding, and I had 2 children who came to Cyprus for 2 years to work. I was on a Fulbright, so I had to return. And I went to enroll my kids in the kindergarten, and they asked for my marriage certificate. And I brought it, and they said, but this is not valid, you're not married in our books, and so on. So I had, in 2 weeks, have a religious wedding in order to be able. And 2 or 3 years later, the civil wedding was passed from the Parliament. Okay, so the church really, penetrates all our lives. Okay, we cannot go prison a child because we are with our period. We cannot go enter this, enter that, and so on. So it continues to play a very big role. Also, with regard to and it's a very hierarchical system, the church. I don't want to speak about religion because religion is a very private matter. Everyone can choose to be what religion suits her or him, and also to be spiritual in different ways, and this is our right. But our church also is very nationalistic. If you hear some of the archbishops or some of the bishops' sermons in the church, you will wonder, is this a religion of love and a religion of forgiveness, a religion of really empathy and so on. So yes, I don't believe that our church can, unless we have very and the other thing, I think it's very scandalous sometimes, with all these business things and economic interests they promote and so on. But women are really, I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, what if they allow women?
Yeah. No women in the church. Yeah. And also which side of the church we stand. Okay? Men on this side, women there, so that the space within the church, instead of bringing us together, it separates us again, in these particular spaces and so on.
I think this really is a very difficult question. And I think, the problem with church is, whose church, which church? There are lots of churches. So I'm going to speak to you not as the person who actually, Caritas Cyprus is, of course, affiliated with the Catholic Church, which is kind of new to me because I am not a practicing Catholic. So, but I think I would, in a world, more than anything, I think we need faith, right? Again, I would separate your question to me when you say church. I have to say you mean institutionalized religion, right? Which again, not to get too intellectual and to step out, and this is Elizabeth personally, right? These are